Something I learned this year was to do in my essays was the sandwiching method for my body paragraphs. So in the past, in yearbook, I usually wrote my stories in this format, but I only always used this for yearbook purposes. So I would write I would introduce the source, then I would introduce the person I interviewed, then I would say what they said, and then I would include what I thought at the end. And that was just something I always did for yearbook, but only yearbook. And I never thought I could use it in my essays. And well, now I learned that I can write my body paragraphs using this format where I introduce the source, then write what they thought, and then write what I thought. And it just made it so much easier to do my essays. So here in my body paragraph, I used that format where first I introduced who they were. So according to the study conducted by Ferrari, Buffard, and Rainville, they noted that students who had better writing pieces had included some sort of structure in their writing. Then I included the quote, which furthermore, good writers transform knowledge when writing, whereas poor writers often simply engage in knowledge telling without trying to clearly organize their ideas. And then I put that in my own words. They state that poor writers did not have a system as to how to organize what they were trying to say. They would simply talk about it without any sense of organization throughout it. Whereas the students who were considered good writers had a system as to how they wanted to strategically write out their ideas. The more thought they put into how they wanted to write out their information, the better it turned out. And then I put what I thought about it. So I personally agree with this. I believe that having some sort of structure in your writing makes it better, in that it becomes more effective when the audience is trying to read it. I do not think you necessarily have to follow a specific one, but you should develop one that helps your writing flow better. So I think that made it was so much easier to write out my body paragraphs in that format, since everything just flows better. And in the future, I plan on using this method for future research papers that I have to do, and lab reports where I have to give information on past experiments. So I just feel like it'd be such an easy way to introduce the past experiments, then introduce what I think about them in new experiments, and it's just a better way to write body paragraphs. Something else I learned was that we can use personal experience in our personal experiences in our writing. So in the past, I never really wrote about my experiences. I simply wrote about what my sources had to say about it, and left it at that. So now I learned to incorporate my personal experiences with those of the sources and compare what we both felt instead of just leaving it at what they thought. So one way I used this in my essay was going with what Byung and Seo had to say. I disagree with Seo because some people do not do good writing how they are told to. When I was a freshman, my English teacher always made us write our essays in the structure she preferred, and to me that was always difficult because I liked writing my ideas out differently. This caused problems, since at the beginning I would turn them in the way I wanted to write, which caused my grade to suffer. Once I understood I had to do them the way she wanted, I did, and although I thought they were of lesser quality, my grade improved. With that being said, I do not think it is fair for students to have to write with the structure that the teacher is comfortable with. So there I got to share one of my personal experiences and say why I disagreed with her. And it's just an easy way to get what I want across and get to connect what something I went through with that. And in the future, as a doctor, I can incorporate my experiences with what the patients are going through, and hopefully that helps them more. So it's something we can I just feel like it'd help more. I also learned that the conclusion isn't supposed to be a summary. So in the past, I always used my conclusion as a summary of everything I had been talking about in my essay. I just completely reiterated everything and made it short. So now I learned that that's not the way it should be. Instead, you have to give a solution or a call to action. So in my conclusion, I gave my call to action. So I said what I found, and then I said that I believe teachers should teach students to come up with their own textual structures, teach them how to develop their own rather than forcing a structure they believe to be the right one on them. And I just think that's such such a better way, because why does someone want to reread what they just finished reading? Like, it doesn't make sense. In the future, as a doctor, I need to explain everything to my patients and make sure they understand and follow through with what I said with my call to action, instead of just repeating everything I just recommended and not giving them a solution. So something else I've learned was that we can interview normal people. So for my theory map, I was able to interview my friend Valeria, and in the past I just never thought that I could use people I knew, that I could use anyone. So I thought they had to be professional, like professionals, or had to be something I found online to be a reliable source. But I've learned that's really wrong. So since I was able to use Valeria, I was able to get the questions that I needed from her, and I got a new perspective, and it was a really good one. So yeah, we can use anyone we want has some correlation to what we're trying to say, and that has a good point of view. So in the future, when I am doing research in the medical field, I plan on asking people I know that are in the medical field instead of resorting to the internet first, because if they can easily get my answer in a much faster way, like, why not just do that? I also learned that I can get all types of perspectives, so they don't necessarily have to go with what I'm saying. So for example, being in CU, she completely went against what I was trying to say. She said that she thought every student should write in the 5-paragraph essay format, and then after they've learned that, they can start making their own structure. But I think I didn't go with that. So in the past, I never would have used this perspective. Like, I would have completely disregarded it because I always thought that they had to go with what I thought. So I wouldn't have used it. But now I've actually learned that sometimes it's better to get perspectives that disagree with you, because in the end you can write more about why you think differently, and it truly makes your writing sound better. And even in the podcast, it was able to give a little debate and make it more interesting, and it's just a better way to do it. So in the future, as a doctor, when someone tells me something I'm doing is wrong or could be done differently, I plan on hearing them out and instead of just closing myself off. So, because everyone has different perspectives, everyone has different thoughts, ideas on how things could be done. So, yeah. I've also learned that with interviews, you can get more information. So I always thought that finding sources online would be easier and would have a better end result. But actually doing the research and trying to find what I wanted specifically, I learned that it was so much easier to actually ask someone, because I could ask them what I thought, what I wanted to know, and get the answers I wanted to know. So if I asked a simple question and I didn't get the answer I wanted, I could go back and ask it more in detail and get the answer I wanted. So with Valeria, I was able to get everything I wanted to know and do a good theory map by being able to ask and constantly bug her to get the answers I wanted. So in the future, when I have doubts on something, I can ask people I know that are very knowledgeable on the subject instead of just resorting to what I can find online. Something else I've learned is that I need to use sources my audience would listen to, that they would pay attention to. So I never took this into consideration. I used to always just use sources that agreed with me, not thinking this doesn't, they're not the people my audience would listen to. I never took that into consideration. But I learned that I need to find sources that correlate with my audience, someone my audience would listen to. So I used Being in CU, and she was a teacher, so my audience was teachers. So I thought she'd be a good someone they would listen to, since she was a teacher herself. So yeah, I think that's really important now that I've actually understood it, that they need. Yeah. So In the future, when I'm talking to a patient, I will talk to them in more simplified terms, not in the same way I would in a report or be talking to another doctor, because obviously they're not going to understand what I'm trying to tell them, since it's not something they not necessarily learn, but it's not something they really care about. So it's different ways like I would do it to make sure they'd listen. I also learned that I need to make sure what I'm trying to show or say is clear. So for my meme, I had to make sure what I learned, because at first I didn't really understand. In the past, I just used to make my assignments to where I understood, and if someone else didn't, well, I always thought sucks to suck, like I got it, and that's all that matters, but that's really not right. So I learned that it's important to make things clear so your audience clearly understands them and understands what you're trying to show. So here I made sure to include so I included like the little description on the top, and then I made sure to include the names of the sources on the people, so it went with what I was trying to say. I've also learned that you need to talk appropriately to your audience. So before I would normally just talk how I always do without really caring who I was talking to, as long as I was getting to say what I wanted to say. So now I've learned that it's really important to communicate appropriately with your audience. If it's adults, you're obviously not if it's someone professional, you're obviously not going to cuss, and you're not going to speak in like the way you would text a friend. So for my podcast, I just made sure it was in a more professional tone.
Podcast, we're going to be eating pancakes and talking about this.
So do you agree with that?
No, I disagree. Or what do you mean by specific structure?
So I just made sure we were talking in a more formal, not necessarily formal, but in a more appropriate way, where we weren't cussing, or we were talking in full sentences, like it just something a teacher would listen to and wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to listen to this anymore. I've also learned that for feedback, when it comes to feedback, we can ask for specific requests. Like we can ask for whatever we want, and so anything you have a doubt on, you can ask them. I used to think that, I was always too shy to ask for anything. So I would always just see what they suggest and then do what they said. Never said what I wanted. So now I've learned that I can ask for what I want, what I need help with. Like, I have to be specific in order to get what I want. So for my essay feedback, I told them I didn't know what to do for my final assignment. I had my outline done, but not sure what to do after. So I'm used to doing PowerPoints, and we can't do that. The problem makes me feel anxious because I don't want to get a bad grade. I would like more ideas on how to do the final assignment and how to see more examples. So with me asking for specifics, as in I didn't know what to do, I wanted them to tell me what to do. They all gave me ideas, since they said you seem to love reading a lot and have lots of practice in writing. I would think writing your own story would be cool. And that just really helped me, and that's what got me to write my essay. So since they told me like write a story, so I was like, okay. And in the future, when a patient is telling me what they think they have, I need to be specific with the questions I have in order to get a good diagnosis for them. So I have to be able to ask like good questions in order to get good responses. I've also learned that we can ask for literally anything. So even if it's something super hard. So I always thought that people would only help with little things. So I never expected help on the harder problems I would have. But I've learned that I can genuinely ask for help on anything, and that people would help if they knew how. So for my meme feedback, I told them that I didn't know if mine was going to be enough, since I didn't know how to include each perspective, and if I could just put a general one, but I thought maybe it wouldn't be good. So then they all answered, and they told me that they thought that was fine, and it just got me to do my meme a different way, and I got a good grade in the end. So yeah, In the future, I plan to always ask for feedback on everything because there's always room for improvement. So it's better to ask for it than to just not have it. Something else I learned was that you need to use the feedback you were given. So I was always very close-minded and thought I was always right. So I never really listened to what other people told me to do. So when I would get feedback, I just brush it off and leave it how I had it. So I've learned to accept the help since it was something I had actually asked for this time, and it's something that would make my work better. So since before I didn't really know how to ask for feedback, now that I've learned how, it's something that I need. So I've learned to actually use it. And so, for example, in my podcast feedback, I told them I didn't know how to manage my time, so I'd have the whole time. And they all suggested to divide the minutes and talk about sources for approximately 2 minutes each to make sure I had the 8 minutes. To put time frame, space out sources, to talk more with friends. Like, it was all things that I used in my podcast. So it's things that I found really helpful and that really made my podcast so much better. I've also learned that grammar does not matter. So in the past, I always thought that perfect grammar was essential in your writing, that without it, it wasn't good, that it had to be perfect, absolutely perfect. And that's what I was always taught. So I've learned that as long as you know what you're talking about and that you can explain it good in your writing and your writing makes sense, your grammar is literally irrelevant. Like, it does not matter. So, for example, in my theory map, there's multiple mistakes in words. Like, nothing's perfect. So it's just as long as it makes sense, because it obviously still did. It just wasn't perfect, and there was no need for it to be perfect since it's just, you still understand it. So why waste your time on something? So in the future, instead of always stressing on having perfect grammar, I'm going to worry about the actual content more and make sure what I'm trying to say makes sense instead of just focusing on grammar. I've also learned that you need to include your opinions and not just your sources. So in the past, I always just included my source's perspective. Like, I never elaborated on what I thought or what I felt because I always thought that wasn't needed. I based it off just of them. So I've learned that it's okay to contradict them or go along with them. It makes your writing so much better when you express how you feel. So, like, it's just always better to just include a little, like, at the end of your paragraph, your thoughts. So, for example, in this paragraph, I wrote about everything they had to say. I wrote what he believed. So he believed that when it comes to teaching about writing, a less is more approach is better. And then I wrote finally what I thought. So I agree with the fact that teachers should teach in a more laid-back manner. They should allow students to express themselves in their writing and not force the structures they believe would work best on them, but it should not all be thrown out. They should still teach students that they have to develop some structure and plan out their writing. So that was my way of getting my point across and saying whether I agreed or not, my opinion and why. So in the future, I plan to always tell my patients what I think is right for them and not what I think they want to hear. So to always, instead of just going based off of what they're telling me, to just go, oh yeah, like, that's perfect, to actually tell them, like, what I think, what I feel, what they should do, to give them actual real solutions that would be beneficial.